Hello and welcome to Building, Deploying, and Managing Custom Apps in Teams. I'm Joey Glock. I'm a senior program manager on Teams. I work on the platform team where I think about the app model and the app lifecycle. And I'm joined today by my colleague Vaibhav.
Hi everyone, I am Vaibhav Agrawal. I am the program manager with Teams Admin Center, IT Pro team in Microsoft Teams.
Cool. So most of the agenda for today is going to be really running through what the app lifecycle is, describing why it's important to think about, what the value comes in, the tools we're building over the last year that we're about to release. We're going to cover that end to end from where we're at today to where we're going to be very shortly and what we plan to do in the future. There'll be lots of demos and resources as we go through, so we're very excited to get started on this topic. And I really wanted to start at the very beginning with just framing what I mean when I say we're talking about the app lifecycle in Teams. Because again, why is this important? Why should you care about it as primarily a developer? And specifically, it's the app lifecycle is how we connect all of the dots from taking an app from the hands of a developer to the hands of an end user when they're ready to adopt it. And when you're building custom apps for a specific organization or a specific tenant, there is typically a lot of tools and processes and personas involved with passing the app along that line. So you have a developer developing in some environment. You have decision makers, IT admins that do some level of validation. And then IT admins, of course, operationally are in charge at every organization of packaging, publishing, setting up those apps, managing them before an end user can actually discover and use them. So they're a little bit nuanced toward organizational specific processes rather than a submission typically to a global app store where users do a pull model to discover. Really, all these people need to be in place first in order for an app to actually get a time to market to close to zero. So these tools are really important, and I think they're worthwhile, and they'll be the framework for this topic to discuss. So to start, I really want to touch on where Teams platform is at today. And unfortunately, we are pretty fragmented at the moment. We have this, if you go through each of these pipelines, we don't have a lot of connective tissue. Developers develop and test a Teams app in their own environment somewhere where they do some level of their own testing and validation at a technical perspective. And then when they're done, we have no processes and no help at the moment to get that app packaged and in the hands of decision makers for any organization. And they have no tools to run validation on that app to make sure that it functions the way they want it to and provides the value they need. And decision makers have no tools to then package that app and publish it from IT admin's point of view. And we really only provide tools starting at that point. And it's a very manual process today. And as you can see at the bottom here, it spans a few different UI surfaces from the developer's environment to the Teams Admin Center, where we have a couple of different functions for all of this. And then finally, the app gets to the end user. But it's fragmented. It's all over the place. And Vaibhav and I have spent a lot of time this last year thinking about how we can improve this entire process from beginning to end to change this from something that looked like a fragmented mess to something that's super streamlined and straightforward, and that there's connective tissue from the developer's hands in the IDE all the way to end users actually using the app. And again, we think if we can build this right, you can take advantage of this and get your app from the path of development to production really quickly. And if you can reduce that time, we think they'll be more advantageous towards building updates and towards getting the users to adopt these apps in a simple way. So everybody wins when this whole pipeline is built out. And this is really the framework of what I'm going to discuss going forward today. And so when we looked at that at a high level and started to drill into all of the features that can help build all those little arrows and improve those little check marks and check stops there, these were the goals we sought to improve. And this is primarily what we'll talk about in today's conversation. Number one, like I mentioned, we're streamlining the process from develop to validate to publish to manage the apps, to get the apps into the hands of end users. We're making sure as we streamlined that process that everything that we built is programmatically available to make sure that you can, as an organization, all of this can be automated. from the developer to the IT persona, all the way down to the end user. And along the way, it's not enough to just build automation and tools and APIs and features. As the teams team, we're always thinking about collaboration. So how can we make sure that the human element is thought about when an app is moving from the developer to decision maker to IT to end users? How can we improve collaboration there? And then the last couple of points, the second to the bottom there is primarily, we recognize that apps are evolving in any organization from a place where somebody needs to be highly skilled at software development, and they choose their favorite IDE and they stand up their own web service, and then those endpoints get upgraded through environments. That's one way to build apps. But a new emerging way to build apps across M365 is the Power Platform. This is low code, no code development investments. And we wanted to make sure as we built out this pipeline that we accounted for that platform, and that the same tools we're building this whole way through can connect, for instance, Power Apps all the way to end users. And so you'll see what I mean as we go forward. And then again, as I've mentioned before, ultimately, users will use these apps more if these tools are built correctly, so the right people can validate and publish them where they need to go. So as I mentioned earlier, this is just kind of another view on this. This is the framework for this conversation. We're improving every step of this process from developer to end user. And we're going to start with the develop phase. So these are tools that we're building in IDEs to improve the development and testing of Teams apps before they actually get packaged. And just as a footnote here, I'm only going to spend a couple of minutes on this because you'll see in the reference section at the end of this talk, there are dedicated sessions to just this step. All of these tools we're building out to help developers. You'll see sessions at Build to discuss them, and I'll bring that up at the end of the talk if you want more information on this. So let's give you an example. This is a look at Visual Studio, and this is a new view we have and a new tool set to help you really start developing an app. So when we're talking about app lifecycle, we're talking about the very beginning. So these are tool sets that we've built up to set up a project and help scaffold out the development of an app. And as you're writing the code, more than that, you'll see as we go through. So when you're starting, instead of understanding all of the platform concepts that, again, you'll see in other build conversations, like what is a tab, what is a bot, how do we integrate with the bot framework, how do message extensions work? We now directly in the IDE help get those code scaffolding out the door from here. And when you're writing a code, there's help with creating the manifest, which is all of the metadata that packages and defines the Teams app. It helps the Teams client understand, what to render and where. But up until now, we really have stopped helping you there. Like you write your code as a developer, and then you figure out whether or not it's working correctly on your own, and then you figure out how to package it. Well, we've changed that with some of the new tools we've been talking about here at Build, and we're about to launch. We're very excited about. And specifically, we have a manifest validation phase here, where we're going to run a bunch of checks that internally the Teams team uses when we build our own apps. And when we vet apps for the global app store, so not just for custom apps, we take these same tools and we put this in the hands of developers and in our IDEs to help develop these custom apps. So this is on a bunch of different checks. Again, there's a whole topic of conversation on this. It's very exciting stuff. And actually, one of the advantages we get from this is a click-to-run experience. So right from the IDE, you can hit F5, and your app will start running in a Teams client, which is really powerful and exciting. But more relevant to this conversation is the ability to take all of those tools that you've used to develop that app and package them up automatically and just submit them right to the production environment where they need to go. And that sounds really magic and exciting. It also might sound frightening. Like there's very few IT departments that would just trust developers from the IDE to go to production. That's crazy. That's not what we've built. We've built connective tissue that helps set up the approval process. Again, we've thought about all these personas along the way. So let me show you what I mean when I talk about that. So we were in the IDE, and normally from the IDE, you package your app, and then from there, it's up to you to ingest it into Teams, to ingest it into production environment, to figure out what to do. Instead, we've built a very generic submission service. So this is a new workflow And we're working very closely across Microsoft with Visual Studio, VS Code, our own internal app called App Studio, which helps you develop Teams apps, to all call this API. And what that'll do is take an app package, the IDE that you're working in will help package that as a Teams app, and it will submit this app directly to an IT admin. So what this gives is IT admin's ability to, instead of going out to all their different development sources and packaging all these apps together themselves, they can go into the Teams admin center and discover all of the line of business apps available to them at their organization. They don't have to do any packaging on their own anymore. The developer does that for them. And they can then discover and, more importantly, approve those apps. So we're not putting this right into production. This is really a submission for an IT admin or a decision maker to validate the apps and approve them going forward. And I want to pause on this slide because, what I'm talking about is not just, again, the fully fledged, deep understanding of software development support for building Teams apps, but because we're building this in a very generic way, we're also working with partners across M365 to call this same API. So if you're a developer building an app in Power Apps or Power Virtual Agents or the SharePoint framework, if you're in any of those surfaces, this API will be available to them and actually natively be embedded into their UI so that when you're done developing a Power App, you can click Add to Teams and it will actually submit this app to the admin for approval in a quick and easy way. So it's a really powerful, robust, generic API set to aggregate all of these line of business apps from across an organization into one place. And so, we've thought about how that submission API can work. And primarily what we're going to talk about today is a single step approval, a really easy way for admins to discover apps, click approve, click publish, and the app will be published for their end users. But we're also thinking about, the complexities of that process. It's not always easy in a giant enterprise to just have an admin click approve. There's business decision makers, people with high visibility. There's a whole process around app approval. And we're thinking about that along this pipeline. But simultaneously, on the flip side of that coin, with this submission API, we're also thinking about, as the degree of trust to what a developer is building. So let's say you trust a source from an organization like Power Apps, and you know where that data is stored, you know that app can't do something nefarious. If an organization trusts it, how can we get that approval process down to zero? How can we get it so that a developer can submit and the app is approved? And we're thinking about all these services, but in this conversation today, we're primarily going to talk about that single step approval workflow. And so let's see what that looks like. I'm going to show you an example in Visual Studio, but again, this is exposed across all of these M365 platforms and surfaces. It's in Power Apps. It'll be across the board supported. But let's just look at what that could look like in Visual Studio. So this is back to that view where we were helping you create your manifest, helping you validate your app as a developer, basically helping your app function. But now you're done. And instead of making you export that thing as a package that Teams understands, we'll give you the ability to publish directly from an IDE. So this is again that submission process. And this isn't publishing something directly to production. It's publishing it in front of an admin space so that they can approve the app. So there's an experience here that says, much like you have the ability to submit your app to the public app store globally for Teams, you also will now have the ability to submit your app to your organization. So you click this button, you sign in with your user credentials so the admin understands who's submitting and publishing this app. And from there, we take care of that packaging process for you. There's no files, zip files you have to deal with the manifest. The IDE is just going to do that. So here's the metadata of that app, version 1, and it's going to publish company news articles. And that's where you can hit submit request. And from there, this is the same UI that you come back to check that request to make sure an admin was notified and that they've actually approved your app. And you can view the status of that at any time. So here's somebody that's maybe submitted a couple of apps and saw that one was approved and another one is actually awaiting approval from here. So again, this is this connective tissue between the developer developing and building an app all the way to publishing the app to the IT's hands. And it's just kind of the first half of this workflow. And I talked about a lot of different little UI screenshots and features, but I wanted to show a quick demo of what this would look like live. So let's play a video here. And this is really going to showcase how quick that whole experience is inside the Teams console. So here I am in Visual Studio. creating a new project. There's now this quick start wizard I talked about. We have Teams as a dedicated presence in Visual Studio. And, in our project, we can help you scaffold out your app. We can help you build tabs with fluid components. And you've done all that. That's great. You then define your app manifest as a developer, which is the metadata to understand what the app is. You validate the app. You click play. And again, we'll put you directly in Teams to test and validate your app on your own, whether that's on mobile or desktop. And then finally, we have you in that publication step where you can either publish globally if you're a third-party IDE, but more than that, you can publish a custom app directly to a tenant app catalog. And that's that submission process that we built out. So somebody clicks that button, adds a note, and submits that submission request to their admin. So it's a really simple, straightforward process, all laid out in one way, a very seamless workflow from here. So everything I talked about is really exciting. We have a lot of different surfaces, Visual Studio Code, but we do recognize that not everybody uses what Microsoft gives guidance to use. And so we wanted to make sure this whole pipeline and solution was extremely flexible for any organization to adapt. And one means to do that is to not lock this down as a tightly coupled feature between the submission service or the IDE and the app catalog UI, but rather expose this over a generic graph API endpoint. So this is a submission API. So you don't have to use any of the IDEs that we're suggesting. You don't have to use any of the M365 platforms like Power Apps. You can build your app however you want, package it however you want, and submit it directly to an admin using this API. And that gives us that real robust, flexible nature that can adapt to any organization. So if there's processes in between here, they can be checked off the list and then programmatically submitted through this API. So it's a really powerful mechanism to get apps into the app catalog that we haven't had up until this point. We've vetted this with some early customers. People are excited. I've heard a couple of customers talk about unique ways in using it that I hadn't thought of, like building out their own internal app stores for developers and IT admins to discover apps. It's an exciting time for what amounts to be a very straightforward, simple, flexible feature, and we're excited to release it to you guys. So up until this point, we've been talking about how you get the app from an IDE and the developer persona all the way to the IT admin. And to talk about what that looks like to the IT admin and how they can take it forward from there, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Vaibhav.
Yeah, thanks, Joy. So now let's continue the flow and look at the validate process on how the decision makers and IT admins in the company would be able to follow their own company-specific business processes and any best practices they have on how they can quickly validate those apps which were submitted from IDEs and take it forward further in the process. So here is the Manage Apps page in the Teams Admin Center. You may have already seen some of these functionalities. As an example, Upload New App, which is already generally available, from which admins were already able to manually upload the custom apps. But now with this new workflow, all the apps which were submitted from IDEs would automatically be available in the Teams Admin Center. So here you can see Onboard App with the app status as blocked. So this was an existing column as status, which is org white status as allowed or blocked. But now we are introducing another column as publishing status. So you can see those newly submitted apps in the submitted status. Beyond that, we would also add features around having the ability to notify admins. So those notifications, also widgets. On the top, you see pending requests. So admin can easily filter all the apps which are in submitted status here. So beyond that, as part of validation, on the About tab, admins can easily see all the details for this app manifest, and they can also download the manifest of that file from this page. So now once admins and BDMs have done the validation, how they can go ahead and publish those apps in their tenant so that end users can easily access those. So let's look at that flow. So here, once the validation process has been done on this app details page, from the publishing status field, admin can go ahead and change the status from submitted to published. Once the app has been published, those users who have access to that app based on policies, which I'm going to talk about, the users would be able to see those apps in the tenant app store. So here you can see Build for Contoso. These are the different custom apps which are available in the tenant. So now let's look at the demo for the newly submitted apps. Here, admin can easily filter all the custom apps to see in their tenant. We have the Employee Pulse app, which was submitted from IDE. On the About page, admin can see all the details of the app. And once the app validation has done, they can simply go ahead and change the status to publish so that this app would be made available to the end users. So now you can see that the app publishing status has changed from submitted to published, and the status, which is the org wide status, has automatically changed from blocked to allowed. So similar to what Joey earlier talked about the graph APIs, similar to app submission API, even for the tenant teams admin center, the graph APIs would be available. So all these actions instead of the UI can also be easily taken up from the graph API itself. So that way you can easily integrate this whole end-to-end flow in any of your own integrations, any custom workflow you may already have. Now let's look at the flow diagram of publishing status. What we saw in the demo, initially when the app is under development and submitted from IDE, it would come in the team's admin center in the submitted state. Then admin can either publish or reject that app. And all the rejected apps as part of the initial plan would disappear from the team's admin center, which developer can then resubmit if need be. Now let's look at to the next segment on permissions and consent. I am not going to go deeper on this topic here, but at a high level, you may already be familiar there could be delegated permissions or application permissions. For delegated, there are some highly privileged permissions which would require the admin consent. As an example, the ability to read all groups in an org directory, groups.read.all, and all the application permissions. The end user, if they want to access that app in the Teams client, they will see the message as you see on the screen, need admin approval. So especially when in AAD, admins may have configured as user consent disabled, then the end users would run into this dead end. They cannot move forward and cannot access the apps. So how we can smoothen that story, we are working on the next slide. We are working on to enable resource specific consent, RSC permissions, where instead of asking for, in case of delegated use of groups.read.all, like having the ability to access all the groups in a tenant, how you can make that a resource specific permission. So here with the access as, let's say, channel message.read.group, we would be able to provide the consent to a specific team. And with that, team owners would be able to consent to the use of their own team data, and admin consent may not be required. Developers can easily declare such RSC permissions in the app manifest. And on the right-hand side, you see in the Teams client, when team owner would go to install that app in their team, they can see all the RSC permissions for which they are granting consent to. Now, let's also look at how we are enabling these features in Teams Admin Center. So we would have this new tab as permissions with 4 different sections. So admin would easily have the visibility to all the different permissions that app is asking for. And then further with integration to Azure AD, global administrators can easily consent to those permissions right within Teams Admin Center instead of going to a different interface. Beyond that, we are also working on to add this feature as add to team. So once that validation has happened, app publishing status you see in the published, admin can go ahead and install any specific team in any team they would like to. So with this add to team, this app can be easily installed in a team scope. Now let's look at the demo on how this permissions, RSC, and install scenario would come to life. Let's take an example of Priority Matrix, third-party app. Here admin can go and find that app. On the About page, they can see all the details of the app. And with permissions, with this Azure AD integration, admin would have visibility to all the permissions this app is asking for and provide consent to those. So here admin is going ahead and accepting those permissions. So that was the first scenario we talked about graph permissions. Now let's go to the next scenario for RSC permissions. And let's take another app as an example, YPA, which is a custom app. You can see a new column as graph RSC permissions as yes. Here again, admin can see all the details of the app here in the about. And with the permissions, here all those permissions as an example, read messages in this team are visible to admin. And once they have done the validation, they got the information from the end users that, hey, this is the particular team where they would like to install this app. With this add to temp feature, admin can go ahead and search for a specific team, let's say digital initiative in this example. So they can go ahead and choose that team and add. With that, this particular app has been added to this team. Now to close the circle, we can see in the team's client this message that admin has added YPA to the team. So all the end users would be able to now access this app in this team. Now let's move on to the next scenario of update. We are thinking it holistically. So once any app which are already existing in the application, as an example, FAQ Plus app, which you can see as version 1.0. Now, whenever any update comes from IDE, those would also seamlessly flow to Teams Admin Center. So we can see the publishing status as update submitted for this app and the update available button, which gets highlighted where admin can go ahead, click on that update available button to see more details of that updated app. Next. Here, admin would be able to review all the updated details of that app. And once they are good with it, they can go ahead and publish that app. Next. Now let's look at the demo for the updated app when that submission comes through in Teams Admin Center. So here with the publishing status column, we can sort all the apps. And with the FAQ Plus app, we can see the publishing status as update submitted. And here admin can review all the details. And once validated, they can go ahead and publish that. So now you can see the earlier version was 1.0.0. Now the updated version of the app 1.0.1 has been published in the tenant. Now let's look at the flow diagram for the app update scenario. On the bottom left, you can see the app which was already existing would be in a published status. Now when developer works on it and submit the updated version, let's say version 2, in Teams Admin Center, that app would be available as update submitted status. And then again, similar to a newly submitted app, admin can go ahead or either publish or reject that updated version V2. In case they reject that updated version V2, the previous version V1 would still remain in the published status. So far we covered the published scenario. Now let's look at how all those published apps can be easily managed and apply any policies. In future, we would also have some app configuration settings around that. So let's go deeper on what all those different setups and management can be done post publishing the apps. And beyond that, once that management has happened, the end users would be easily able to discover and use those apps which have been provided by the team's admins. So this is the permission policy, which is already generally available using these different three kind of apps: Microsoft apps, third-party apps, or tenant apps. Admins can apply what kind of access they would like to provide on these apps. Here is an example of setup policies. So the new Employee Pulse app, which was published by the admin, if let's say you want to promote, have higher visibility of this app, that can be pinned. So all the users to which setup policies has been applied, they would be able to see Employee Pulse app in the app bar in Teams client. Now what we are working on is having the ability to install this app in a personal scope. So what I showed you for permission section, that was the ability to add the app in a team scope. But let's say for any specific set of users who want to use it in a personal scope, with this installed app feature, we can go ahead and add that from the Teams Admin Center. Now let's look at a demo of how different apps can be installed from the Teams Admin Center. So for the install app scenario in the personal scope, admin can go ahead and create a setup policy, let's say for this demo purpose. So let's name it as install Trello, where we want to demo on how Trello app can be installed to a specific set of users. Here we can go ahead and search the specific app and add that in the installed app section. So now admin has added Trello app in the setup policies. Let's go ahead and save that. So there could be different ways on how the setup policies can be applied to different set of users. In this demo, let's take the example from users page. And for this specific user, we can see all the policies which has been assigned to this user in the policies tab. And admin can go ahead and change, let's say for testing purpose. So we have this app setup policy as global by default, and we can reassign that to the new setup policy we just created. So once this policy has been assigned to this user, now we can go to Teams client and see that in the app bar, this particular user can easily see this app which has been installed for him. So with that, we covered the end-to-end flow for the custom app lifecycle. You saw how easily from the different IDEs, developers can create and submit those apps, to how decision makers and IT admins can easily collaborate, validate those apps, and be able to publish the apps for the whole tenant, and thereafter apply policies with that end users would be easily able to see all those added apps, pinned apps, and can make best use of it to be highly productive and collaborative in their day-to-day life. So there are many of these related sessions. There is one on the Teams platform all-up capabilities. There is one as a streamlined app management, where we will also talk about the licensing features we are coming up with, and many more sessions on how developers can easily build apps on using these different tools, and also on low-code, no-code Power Platform-based tools. Here we have shared some of the resources which are already available on doc site for you to learn more. And as we release these new features over different iterations, we will keep our docs up to date. That's all I got. So you have anything else to add?
I do not. Thank you for your time, and be safe out there, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.